When you think about access to like really powerful people today, it is it's pretty much entirely defined by the velvet rope.
Oh, absolutely. The security details, the executive assistants.
Right. You've got non-disclosure agreements, endless layers of bureaucracy. I mean, proximity is basically a commodity now. You don't just, walk into a Fortune 500 CEO's office.
No, you definitely don't.
Or like stroll up to a head of state and just ask some random elementary question. I mean, you'd be tackled by security and escorted out of the building.
Yeah, probably in handcuffs.
Exactly. Because we are so conditioned to expect that true power is fundamentally just unapproachable. But then you open the New Testament, right? And you look at the ultimate authority figure, the Lord of life and glory, and that whole exclusionary architecture is completely missing.
It's gone.
It is a wildly different paradigm. And, well, you're listening to Reform Thinking. Today, we are doing a deep dive into an 1855 masterclass by the legendary preacher Charles H. Spurgeon.
A phenomenal text.
It really is. And our mission today is to figure out why God hands out this incredible, intimate VIP access to some people and completely hides it from others.
Yeah, and the grounding text for this entire exploration is a sermon Spurgeon delivered at the New Park Street Chapel in Southwark. It's titled, Christ Manifesting Himself to His People. And, he roots this massive theological puzzle in one single highly specific verse, which is John 14.22.
Right.
It's the moment in the upper room where Judas in the text immediately throws up a guardrail here to clarify. Not Iscariot asks Jesus, Lord, how is it that thou wilt manifest thyself unto us and not unto the world?
Okay, let's unpack this right away, because I want to pause on the immediate context of that question. Spurgeon emphasizes this incredible contrast between Jesus and the religious elites of first-century Judea. I mean, Jesus is just a wildly accessible master.
He really is, especially compared to the establishment.
Yeah. If you look at the ecclesiastics of that era, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they walked around in this heavy formality. They literally wore their exclusivity on their sleeves, with the enlarged phylacteries and the robes.
Very performative.
Right. But here is the Son of God, and he's talking to uneducated fishermen like a father talks to his children.
And, the historical context makes that accessibility even more subversive, because in a standard first-century rabbinic setting, the relationship between a master and a disciple was strictly hierarchical.
Oh, totally.
If a disciple asked a seemingly ignorant question, it wouldn't just invite a gentle correction. I mean, it would often invite severe public humiliation. The master's role was to be intellectually untouchable.
You don't question the master.
Exactly. Yet Spurgeon points out how Jesus handles what we might cynically call, stupid questions. He points to Philip, who had been witnessing Jesus' miracles for years, and he just suddenly blurts out, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us.
Which is, that is such a profound misunderstanding of the incarnation.
It really is.
Yeah. Philip is basically asking for a physical, visual manifestation of God the Father right there in the upper room. If I'm leading that group, I think I might lose my patience.
You don't want to pull your hair out.
Yeah. I'd probably say, Philip, have you literally not been paying attention to anything I've been saying for the last 3 years?
Well, and any other teacher of that day would have rebuked him harshly. But Jesus, he doesn't humiliate him. He just offers this gentle, course-correcting instruction saying, he that hath seen me hath seen the Father.
Wow.
And then, right after that, Judas steps up with his own inquiry. And practically speaking, Judas didn't even need to ask this question.
Why not?
Because the answer was already being demonstrated. In the very act of Jesus washing their feet and speaking to them privately, he was answering the question. But rather than snapping at Judas for, interrupting the flow of the discourse, Jesus uses it.
He pivots.
Yeah. Spurgeon beautifully observes that sometimes Jesus teaches by answering directly, and sometimes he teaches most wisely by his silence, by passing gracefully on to another subject that the disciple actually needs to hear.
Now, before we get to the absolute core of Judas's question, we really have to look at the parenthesis in that verse, because the Holy Ghost specifically inspires the writer, John, to include the phrase, Judas, not Iscariot.
Right.
And if I'm just reading through the gospel quickly, I treat that as just a clerical clarification. There were 2 guys named Judas in the inner circle. The writer just wants to make sure I know which one is talking, so I don't attribute a faithful question to the guy who sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver.
Sure, just basic record keeping.
Exactly. But Spurgeon camps out on this tiny detail. He treats it as this massive theological comfort regarding how God views a believer's legacy. Why does Spurgeon spend so much time on this? Isn't it just clerical?
What's fascinating here is that he deduces a profound psychological and spiritual reality from those three words. It proves that God cares deeply about a believer's reputation.
Really?
Yeah, Spurgeon frames this around the terrifying concept of being written in what he calls the calendar of infamy.
Oof, the calendar of infamy. That's a heavy phrase.
It is, because there is a universal human desire to have an unblemished character, right? To be remembered well. And Spurgeon relates this directly to his own ministry. You have to keep in mind, in 1855, Spurgeon was this young phenomenon in London.
Right, he was what, barely in his 20s?
Exactly. He was facing intense media scrutiny and, honestly, vicious misrepresentation by his critics in the press. So he extracts immense comfort from the idea that however much the world might slander a Christian in the present, God is keeping perfect records.
So it completely changes the way you view your own public perception. The promise is that the memory of the just is blessed.
Exactly.
God will ultimately step in and say, no, no, this was Judas, not Iscariot. He will not allow the righteous to be eternally lumped in with the wicked in the final account.
Yes, the comfort.
But, if God cares that much about distinguishing his faithful from the traitor in the historical record, it kind of forces us to ask how he distinguishes his followers from the rest of humanity in their day-to-day spiritual lives. Which brings us to what Spurgeon calls the great fact.
The great fact.
Right, the reality that Jesus manifests himself to his people and not to the world. So what actually is this manifestation?
Well, to define what that manifestation actually is, Spurgeon introduces the concept of the Bible of experience.
Okay, the Bible of experience.
Yeah, and this is a crucial distinction in Reformed thought. He argues that even if the written scriptures didn't explicitly declare that Christ reveals himself uniquely to the elect, true believers would still know it.
Because they've lived it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because it is burned into their lived experience. It's an internal, subjective reality that confirms the objective truth of the Word.
I love how he describes it, too. He calls it a young heaven on earth or a paradise in embryo.
Such great imagery.
It really shatters the modern secular assumption that Christianity is just a sterile system of ethics or like just a set of intellectual propositions that you just nod and agree to.
Right, like a philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, you can memorize the entire Westminster Confession. You can parse Greek verbs all day long and still not have this manifestation. It is a visceral, experiential reality.
And the theological term for those who lack this experience is unregenerate.
Right.
When Reformed theology speaks of the unregenerate, it means people whose hearts have not been sovereignly changed by the Holy Spirit. They are, spiritually speaking, completely dead. So to them, this kind of intimate communion with Christ, it sounds like absolute madness.
They just can't process it.
They can't. It is a foretaste of the glorified state. The believer is experiencing a genuine internal communion with the living God that the outside world is entirely blind to.
And to illustrate how invisible yet profound this dividing line is, Spurgeon uses this brilliant rhetorical device. He essentially writes a piece of speculative fiction right in the middle of his sermon.
He does, yeah.
He imagines commissioning a spirit from an unknown world, sending it down to observe the globe, and asking it to identify these specific people who receive these heavenly manifestations.
And the imagery he uses is incredibly stark.
It's so vivid. The Spirit reports seeing this massive, chaotic multitude of humanity just trampling over one another, rushing frantically down one broad path.
Yeah.
And every single person in that massive crowd has the word self stamped on their forehead.
Self, capital S.
Exactly. It's all about self-preservation, self-promotion.
But the contrast the Spirit observes is what actually defines the Christian life. Because pushing against that massive, overwhelming stream of humanity, just elbowing their way through intense opposition, is a tiny remnant marching in the exact opposite direction.
Pushing upstream.
Yes, and on their foreheads is inscribed the word Christ. But Spurgeon, he doesn't just leave it at abstract metaphors. The Spirit tracks this remnant and observes very specific, tangible markers.
Like what?
Well, they enter a wicket gate that says, "Mercy for the chief of sinners." They gather in secret assemblies. Their lives are characterized by deep, agonizing prayer. We're talking groanings that cannot be uttered.
And the behavioral contrast is razor sharp. The Spirit notices where these people refuse to go. Spurgeon paints this vivid picture of a well-lighted tavern on a street corner, decorated with what he calls mystic Kabbalistic signs.
Which is a very 19th century way of saying, the glowing signs of a bar.
Yeah, the neon signs of his day. Marks of woe and ill-doings, he calls them. The wicked are inside, reveling in drunkenness. But the Christian, Spurgeon says, literally puts his hand over his eyes and hurries past.
They flee from it.
They do. Then Spurgeon points to the theater, which he bluntly calls a haunt of hell and the seat of the scorner. And then, even in the Christian's own home, they drive away liars and profligates.
Right.
Now, I have to step in here on behalf of, a modern listener who might be getting very uncomfortable right now.
I can imagine.
Because this sounds dangerously close to strict Victorian legalism. It sounds like Spurgeon is saying, okay, if you want Jesus to visit you, you must stop going to the bar, you must avoid the theater, and you have to clean up your act.
Yeah.
Is he just preaching behavior modification here?
That is the natural fear, but it fundamentally misreads Spurgeon's theology. If he were saying that, he would be preaching works righteousness.
Right, which he hated.
He vehemently opposed it. The idea that you can earn God's favor through your own moral effort is completely contrary to his entire ministry. What he is describing here is the fruit of being a select and separate people, not the root.
Okay, fruit versus root. That's a huge distinction.
Massive. The behavior doesn't earn the manifestation. The behavior is the inevitable result of having your heart fundamentally changed by sovereign grace. When Christ becomes your supreme affection, the cabalistic signs of the world, they just simply lose their gravitational pull on your soul.
Oh, I see. It's like the difference between forcing yourself not to eat poison because it's the rules versus just naturally losing your appetite for poison because you've tasted a Michelin star meal.
That is the exact mechanism at play.
Wow.
And Spurgeon takes a very bold stance here against the theological trends of his day. He openly mocks the idea of universal grace or universal manifestations. He makes absolutely no apologies for proclaiming that this is, in his words, free grace to peculiar characters.
Peculiar characters.
Yeah. God sovereignly elects a people for himself, and their separated countercultural lives are the visible, outward evidence of that invisible election.
Okay, so let's say you are one of these peculiar characters. You're pushing against the stream of self.
Yeah.
You've experienced this grace. Does that mean you just, float through life in a constant, unbroken state of ecstatic spiritual bliss?
Not at all.
Because Spurgeon argues the exact opposite. He claims that even for the truest believer, these manifestations aren't a constant everyday baseline. They are tied to very specific seasons in the life of a Christian.
And he names them.
Yeah, namely seasons of duty and seasons of trial. Here's where it gets really interesting, because he gets incredibly pastoral here, and he pulls absolutely no punches.
He really doesn't. He observes that he has never found a lazy, indifferent Christian who enjoys deep manifestations of Jesus Christ.
Never.
Never.
Yeah.
He says if your life is entirely consumed with earthly business, if you just fold your arms, eat, drink, and seek mere comfort, you are locking yourself out of the secret chamber of the Most High.
Which is such a striking warning. He brings up this obscure biblical analogy about the tribe of Issachar from Genesis. Issachar is described as a strong ass crouching down between two burdens.
A beast of burden.
Right. And Spurgeon basically says, if you act like Issachar, if you are a beast of burden that refuses to move the kingdom, you don't get the carrots, you get the whip.
It's a blunt.
It's so blunt. He states that for those who do little for Christ, Christ does little for them in the way of special, comforting visits.
But the inverse of that warning is incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, the reward.
Exactly. He establishes a direct, proportional relationship between spiritual exertion and spiritual joy. He uses this brilliant phrase, when we dig the deepest, we get the sweetest water.
Dig the deepest, get the sweetest water.
Right. The Christian who labors zealously, who exhausts themselves in service to the Master, has their bread sweetened by the sweat of their brow. God treats his hardworking servants with spiritual dainties.
I love that word, dainties.
It's very evocative. Spurgeon imagines God saying, I have taken thy bread and dipped it in my own dish. Take it and eat it, for thou art one who works in my own vineyard.
I think that completely upends our modern cultural obsession with self-care. I mean, we operate on the assumption that maximum happiness is derived from maximum rest, boundaries, and avoiding stress at all costs.
Stay up, walls.
Yeah. But Spurgeon is arguing that ultimate soul-satisfying joy is only found in maximum exertion for the kingdom of God.
It's a total paradigm shift.
But it's not just about active physical duty. He immediately pivots to seasons of trial. Because, what happens when you physically cannot labor? What happens when you are laid aside by severe chronic illness or bedridden?
Well, he offers immense theological dignity to the suffering believer here. In a reformed worldview, suffering is never accidental and it's never wasted.
He has every purpose.
A deep purpose. Spurgeon says that when you are sick in bed, if you bear it with patient endurance, you are not useless. You are actively serving God by suffering.
And to back this up, he quotes Colossians 1.24, where the Apostle Paul talks about filling up that which is behind the sufferings of Christ. Now, I have to raise a massive theological red flag here.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Right, because if we believe in the finished work of the cross, that Jesus paid it all completely, how can there possibly be anything behind or lacking in the sufferings of Christ? Doesn't that verse imply that the atonement was, I don't know, insufficient?
It is arguably one of the most misunderstood verses in the New Testament, and Spurgeon expertly navigates the tension by drawing a vital distinction between the head and the body.
Okay, break that down for us.
Christ is the head of the church. The suffering required for atonement, the actual payment for sin, the absorbing of the wrath of God, was entirely borne by the head. That work is finished, complete, and perfectly sufficient. No human suffering can add a single drop to the atonement.
Okay, so the debt is paid. So what exactly is the church filling up then?
The mystical body, the church, has a measured, predestined portion of physical and emotional affliction it must endure throughout human history as it bears witness to a hostile world.
A predestined portion.
Yes. Spurgeon visualizes this as a massive, bitter cup that the global church must collectively drink before it finally enters glory. Every single believer has to take a sip.
Wow.
But here is the breathtaking communal aspect of this theology. If one believer takes a deep draught of that cup through severe illness or intense persecution, and they endure it patiently, there is mathematically less suffering left for their brothers and sisters in the rest of the body.
Oh my goodness. That reframes personal tragedy entirely.
It gives it cosmic significance.
It really does. Your chronic pain or your persecution isn't just some random curse you're dealing with. It is a vicarious service to the global church. You are literally lessening the burden for your fellows.
Exactly.
And Spurgeon ties this directly to how we experience God's presence. He points out a fascinating linguistic nugget in the Old Testament. The Hebrew word for weight kabod is the exact same word used for glory.
The theology of kabod is profound here. A weight of trouble is a glory to a Christian, and glory itself is a weight that bows a person down in absolute humility at the Master's feet. God orchestrates the rhythm of the Christian life around this dynamic.
Right, because Spurgeon notes this historical pattern where immense joy often precedes a trial, almost to prepare the believer.
To stock the pantry, so to speak.
Exactly. He points to Israel getting miraculous water from the rock right before they had to fight the Amalekites. Or Jacob being met by hosts of angels at Mahanaim just hours before he had to face his estranged, violent brother Esau. God stocks the pantry before the winter hits.
And conversely, in the absolute depths of the trial, that is when the consolation of Christ is the sweetest. Our spiritual joys are inversely proportioned to our earthly comforts.
That is a hard pill to swallow.
It is, but history proves it. When your life is defined by prosperity, when your barn is full and your bank account is overflowing, that is historically when the sanctuary of God is forsaken by the believer.
We get comfortable.
We do. But when the fig tree doesn't blossom, when the stalls are empty and everything is stripped away, that is the exact environment where God's presence is most palpable.
Okay, so we've established who experiences this and the seasons when it occurs, duty and trial. But I want to talk about the mechanics of the display itself. What does it actually look like in the mind and heart of a believer to have Christ manifest himself?
It's intensely personal.
It is. Spurgeon gets deeply vulnerable here, sharing his own internal meditations with the congregation. He describes visually transporting himself to Gethsemane, literally watching Christ sweat drops of blood.
Visualizing it.
Yeah. He talks about eating the bitter herbs by the brook Kedron. He mentally stands at Calvary, visualizing the crown of thorns, the nails, hearing the death shriek. It is an intensely visceral, emotional exercise.
It is. But we must note that Spurgeon doesn't limit this manifestation to a hyperfixation on the passion of Christ.
No, he goes further.
Much further. The theological breadth of the vision is what makes it uniquely reformed. Yes, it is seeing the suffering, but it is also seeing Christ in his gifts.
What do you mean by gifts in this context?
Well, it's the spiritual visualization of the mighty sacrifice actively burning up all your specific personal sins. It is seeing the perfect, justifying righteousness of Christ being placed upon your shoulders like a brilliant, spotless garment.
Oh, that's beautiful. And he pushes the vision all the way into eschatology, too, seeing Christ in his triumph.
The conquering king?
Yes. He describes visualizing Jesus with one foot on the neck of Satan and the other on the throat of death, marching up the sky with glittering hosts behind him, and finally taking his seat on the great white throne, grasping his scepter.
It's awe-inspiring.
Spurgeon argues that faith has the power to outsoar the wings of time and drag that future reality into your present moment of despair.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, when you look at the intellectual climate of the 19th century, Spurgeon knows exactly how dangerous this sounds to his contemporaries.
Because of the Enlightenment.
Exactly. Rationalism and modernism were deeply taking root in Europe. Anything that smacked of religious ecstasy, visions, or deep emotionalism was heavily scrutinized. It was dismissed as enthusiasm or fanaticism.
The church was getting very academic.
Very intellectualized and spiritually cold. But Spurgeon fiercely defends this experiential mysticism. He unapologetically states that if he hasn't sometimes snuffed the incense from the censers of the glorified, then he isn't even a living man. True Christianity, for him, requires this spiritual elevation above the mere material world.
And to prove that this isn't just poetry, he shares a historical anecdote about a minister named Mr. Tennant.
Oh, this story is wild.
It really is. Tennant went for a walk in the woods before an evening preaching engagement. And while he was walking, he experienced such an overpowering, crushing manifestation of the presence of Christ that his physical body just gave out.
He couldn't handle it.
He fell to his knees, became completely insensible to the world around him, and he missed his sermon entirely.
Just left the congregation waiting.
Yeah. And when a search party finally found him hours later and roused him, his face was literally shining. He described the experience as holding fellowship with Jesus heart against heart.
It is a staggering account of divine communion. But, Spurgeon is not naive.
No, he's very pragmatic.
As a pastor, he understands human nature perfectly, and he knows that the human heart is deeply deceitful. Throughout history, countless people have faked these ecstatic experiences.
Oh, totally.
Or they've psychologically tricked themselves into thinking they've had them, either to gain spiritual authority over others or just to be the center of attention.
Which raises the obvious question.
Yeah.
Because humans are incredibly adept at faking spiritual highs. I mean, if someone comes into the church today and claims they spent 3 hours in the woods talking to Jesus, heart against heart, how on earth do you differentiate a genuine divine manifestation from, say, a narcissist just putting on a show? What is the litmus test?
Spurgeon provides a flawless, highly practical metric to test the spirits here. He calls it the 3 H's.
3 H's, okay.
The first metric is humility. If a person claims to have received massive spiritual communications, and the result is that they carry themselves like a great, important, spiritually superior person, they are lying.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. The biblical pattern is abundantly clear. True nearness to God absolutely annihilates human pride. Think of Isaiah in the temple crying out, "Woe is me!"
Right, because God knows the proud from afar off. If there is no brokenness, there was no vision.
Exactly. The second H is happiness. And this makes perfect logical sense. You simply cannot live in close proximity to the infinite source of all joy and remain perpetually miserable, bitter, and cynical.
It's mutually exclusive.
It really is. And then the third H is the ultimate filter, holiness.
The rubber meets the road.
Exactly. This is where the theological rubber meets the practical road. Deeds must align with words. Spurgeon argues that God will never bestow his highest, most intimate favors upon the wicked.
So, if there's hidden sin.
If someone claims to have ecstatic visions of Jesus, but they live in unrepentant sin, they abuse their spouse, or they cheat their business partners, they are entirely deceived. God will not respect an evildoer. Humility, happiness, and holiness. If those 3 fruits are not actively growing in the person's life, the manifestation was a counterfeit.
It's such a clean biblical filter. But, okay, if we accept that this ecstatic joy is real and we have a way to verify it with the 3 H's, it kind of forces us to confront the much harder, honestly more offensive question. The why. Right. Why would God grant this incredible intimacy to, like, a cheating tax collector like Matthew or a former demoniac like Mary Magdalene, but completely hide it from the wealthy, the powerful, and the seemingly decent people of the world? It feels inherently exclusionary.
Yeah, it does.
Which brings us right back to Judas's initial question in the upper room.
Yeah.
How is it? I mean, why did Judas even ask this in the first place?
Well, Spurgeon unpacks a few potential psychological motives behind Judas's question, because that's a very natural question to ask.
Sure.
The first motive he suggests is plain ignorance
Ignorance of what?
of the nature of the kingdom. Judas might have been operating under the assumption that the Messiah was going to physically, politically manifest himself, perhaps descending in a chariot of fire
Right.
or appearing in a cloudy pillar over Jerusalem, like in the Old Testament.
Right, a massive spectacle.
Yeah, and logically, if Jesus does that, the occupying Roman army is going to see it too. So Judas is asking a purely logistical question. How can you possibly show yourself to us without the whole world seeing the spectacle?
That makes a lot of sense. But Spurgeon also suggests a motive of profound love for the master, right?
Yes. He says Judas might have been frustrated that Jesus was remaining so obscure. He wanted Jesus to have universal dominion. He wanted every single heart on earth to recognize the Savior's glory.
Almost like a holy impatience, like show them how great you are.
Exactly. Alternatively, it could have been driven by pure admiration and humility. Judas might have been looking around that upper room, seeing uneducated fishermen, former extortionists, outcasts, and just thinking, Lord, look at us. What on earth did we do to deserve this?
Why us?
Why us, and not the influential, the wealthy, or the righteous of the world?
But the motive that Spurgeon really spends the most time dissecting is what he calls great kindness. He diagnoses Judas as perhaps being, in his words, slightly an Arminian.
Which is a brilliant little theological jab.
Oh, totally. Let's unpack that term for a second, because Arminian is one of the great dividing lines in Protestant theology.
It is. Arminianism, generally speaking, is the theological belief that human free will is the ultimate deciding factor in salvation. It pushes back against the Reformed idea of absolute predestination.
Right. It argues that God's grace is universally available to everyone equally, and it is entirely up to the individual to accept or reject it.
Right. So when Spurgeon calls Judas slightly an Arminian, he means that Judas, out of a sense of human benevolence, wished that this special saving grace was universally distributed to absolutely everybody.
He wanted everybody in on the secret.
Yes. And it is here that Spurgeon delivers a sharp, defining pastoral rebuke. He says, we must never try to be more benevolent than God.
Never try to be more benevolent than God. I mean, that statement completely strips away our modern humanitarian superiority complex. We love to judge God's actions by our own ethical standards of fairness.
We do. We project our own sentimentality onto the divine.
Yeah.
It exposes the arrogance of human benevolence. Spurgeon argues that it is foolish and actually deeply sinful for us to meddle with God's secret decrees.
Because we don't have the full picture.
We don't have even a fraction of it. God, in his infinite wisdom, knows exactly how many sinners will perfectly glorify him in their salvation, and how many will glorify his justice in their rebellion. Our human benevolence is finite, it's flawed, and it's often driven by pure emotion. God's sovereign wisdom is infinite and perfect. We just have to submit to his distribution of grace.
And what is incredibly telling is that Jesus never actually answered Judas's question as to why.
He didn't.
He didn't. Jesus didn't give the disciples a philosophical breakdown of election right there in the upper room. So Spurgeon takes it upon himself to answer the why using the broader, unified witness of Scripture.
The full counsel of God.
Right. And he boils it down to the most humbling truth imaginable. He says, why does God love you? Because he would love you.
It's circular, but perfectly so.
He roots it entirely in Romans 9. He will have mercy on whom he will have mercy.
Which is the absolute bedrock of Reformed theology, unconditional election. God's choice to save someone is not based on any foreseen merit, faith, or goodness in that person.
Not even a little bit.
Not at all. It is based entirely on his own sovereign good pleasure.
But let me step into the shoes of the skeptic here, because this doctrine of unconditional election has literally caused riots in church history.
Oh, yeah. Spurgeon faced mobs over this.
And it is the exact objection Spurgeon anticipates from his own congregation. If my neighbor and I are both equally bad, equally, totally depraved by nature, why does God sovereignly choose to give saving grace to me and not to my neighbor? How does that not make God fundamentally unfair and unjust?
It is the most common objection to Reformed theology, and Spurgeon dismantles it using two incredibly potent analogies to explain the mechanics of justice versus grace.
The first one is the two beggars.
Right, the analogy of the two beggars. Imagine two beggars come to your front door, you have never met them, and you owe them absolutely nothing.
Okay, totally zero obligation.
Zero. If you choose to turn one beggar away empty-handed, but you sovereignly choose to give $100 to the other beggar, have you been unjust to the one who received nothing?
No.
No. You cannot be unjust if you had no prior obligation.
Because grace, by definition, cannot be a debt. The moment God owes you grace because of fairness, it ceases to be grace. It becomes a wage.
Precisely. You earned it, so it's not grace. But Spurgeon knows the beggar analogy is actually too soft, because sin is not merely poverty, it is treason.
It's active rebellion.
Yes, so he escalates to a much more intense analogy, the 50 men on the scaffold.
This one is intense.
It is. Imagine 50 criminals have been perfectly flawlessly convicted of high treason against the king. They are all standing on the scaffold, completely deserving of the noose. There is no question of their guilt.
They did the crime?
They did it. Now, if the king decides, out of his own sovereign pleasure, to issue a royal pardon to 5 of them and allows the law to take its rightful course on the other 45, is the king unjust?
Man, let's just sit with the emotional weight of that scaffold analogy for a second, because that is a terrifying view of God's severe justice. If 45 people are left to hang, how does Spurgeon expect a Christian to emotionally reconcile that? Does this theology breed a kind of elitist arrogance in the 5 who are saved? Like, look at us, we got picked.
If it's misunderstood, maybe. But if understood correctly, it does the exact opposite.
It crushes pride.
It completely crushes it. It breeds the deepest, most profound gratitude imaginable mixed with holy terror. The 45 who are punished are receiving exact, perfect justice. They are getting exactly what their treason demanded.
Right.
The 5 who are pardoned are receiving unmerited, scandalous mercy.
So no one is getting injustice.
Exactly. No one on that scaffold is receiving injustice. Spurgeon's point is that if you stand before the creator of the universe and demand pure fairness, you are demanding your own damnation.
Because fair means we all hang.
If God is only fair, we all go to hell. You cannot accuse God of injustice for withholding a pardon you never deserved in the first place.
That is just so sobering. And Spurgeon addresses a very specific group of critics in his day who hated this doctrine. People who hear this defense of absolute divine sovereignty and label it antinomian.
The antinomian charge.
Right. And for you listening, antinomianism literally means against the law. It's the accusation that if you preach unconditional election, people will just live however they want, completely lawlessly because, well, they are predestined anyway. Critics say it makes God a tyrant and ruins morality.
But I love how Spurgeon flips the script on his accusers here. This raises an important question. Who is the real antinomian? Who is the one actually breaking the law?
The plot twist.
Right. Spurgeon says the true antinomian is the one who is actively rebelling against the king's divine right to rule. If God declares, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and you kick against that, refusing to yield to his right to govern his universe as he sees fit, you are the lawbreaker.
You're trying to usurp the throne.
Exactly.
No.
You are letting your own human pride and your fragile sense of fairness dictate terms to the Almighty.
Wow. It absolutely destroys the illusion that we contributed even 1% to our own salvation. We bring nothing but the sin that made it necessary.
Nothing at all.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, what does all of this 19th century theology actually mean for you today? Spurgeon ends his sermon with a critique of the church of his time that feels, honestly, uncomfortably relevant right now.
Very prophetic.
He describes a lean, starved church that is content to live on low ground. He uses the biblical metaphor of the Valley of Baca.
Which comes from Psalm 84.
Right, and it translates to the Valley of Weeping. He says too many believers are just tarrying in the valley, living on a starvation diet of theology, when they could be living on the high places of communion with Christ.
It is a resounding, urgent call to spiritual ascent. Spurgeon is basically begging his congregation, do not settle for a nominal, valley-dwelling Christianity that only seeks God on Sunday mornings.
It's tragic to settle for that.
It is. He says, trip lightly across the plain of trouble, get to the side of Calvary, ascend to the very summit. He wants believers to climb Mount Carmel, like Elijah calling down the fire of God's presence.
He wants them on the peaks.
Yes. He wants them to stand on Pisgah's top, just like Moses did when he looked across the Jordan River to see the Promised Land and view the sweet fields beyond the swelling flood.
And he leaves the listener with a final, very sobering warning. For anyone who might be listening to this and, despising these manifestations, anyone who thinks this experiential Reformed theology is just fanaticism or outdated nonsense.
He doesn't let them off the hook.
Not at all. Spurgeon issues a terrifying reality check. If your first revelation of Christ is not in mercy at Calvary, it will inevitably be in justice in flaming fire. If you refuse to meet him as a savior, the universe guarantees you will meet him as a judge.
And building on everything we've explored today from Spurgeon's text, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over in your own life this week.
Let's hear it.
We discussed earlier how Spurgeon connects the weight of glory directly to the depth of our trials and our labors. He argues that the depth of your joy in Christ is mathematically proportional to your willingness to labor, sweat, and suffer for his kingdom.
Issachar and the burdens.
Exactly. So look at your own schedule this week. What current comfort, what area of ease, entertainment, or self-preservation might you need to sacrifice in order to experience that young heaven on earth that Spurgeon describes?
That's a piercing question.
Are you settling for the velvet rope of the world's comforts? Or are you willing to do the exhausting digging required to taste the sweetest waters of Christ's presence?
That is a profound challenge to carry with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Reformed thinking. Keep wrestling with these heavy truths, keep digging deep, and keep seeking those higher elevations of faith.